welcome everybody to CAHOTECH 2022. I hope you're enjoying yourself. And we have some outstanding speakers today. We have the first panel, which is going to be a series of talks. So for those who don't know me, I'm the Vice President of CAHO and also the Vice Chairman of Dr. Mehta's Hospitals. It's a privilege to hear a lot of the stories here and to understand what can make our healthcare life better tomorrow than it was yesterday. And I think technology is definitely one of the fundamental enablers. And if we can learn from a combination of our peers, our suppliers, and our customers, then life gets better. Today in India, we're also learning a lot from our government, because the project that they've taken on to kind of digitize the 1.3 billion people, which they've successfully done in payments, which they've successfully done in a number of other spaces, has really enabled a fundamental change. And I think we're about to see that in India. So the next 45 minutes, we're going to hear a lot about frugal innovation and how technology plays a key role in frugal innovation. I mean, you all survived COVID. Unlike most of the world, which had pretty limited populations, with the exception of China, which was highly opaque, India had this huge problem that kind of like landed on the government and the private providers, multiple of them across the country's doorsteps, on how do you solve for 1.3 billion people. No playbook in the world solves for that, because most of the developments globally have been done for fine-tuning very small populations or very specific populations with specific ailments, whereas we are a conglomerate of a number of different state health systems that are cobbled together with some central leadership. And I think that's the beauty of India, that we got to see sometimes the great things that happened in state A that were replicated in state B, and sometimes things that struggled in state A that got also replicated in state B, but with a learning curve that was there. And I think if we can figure out how to do this really well, we'll be the playbook, like we're already doing in many spaces, for the rest of the world. Already the payments platform, already the Aadhaar identification platform and the stack under it are in high demand from the rest of the world to understand. And I think that's the opportunity for all of us in healthcare. And I think there are no better speakers than the three that we have lined up for you. Let me start with the first speaker. We have the head managing director of GE in India, Shravan. He's the president and CEO of the organization. He's also the head of Nat Health, which is one of the large organizations like AHPI that brings together the perspectives of multiple healthcare providers and suppliers and stakeholders. So some great leadership there. In a former life before his world of GE Wipro, Shravan spent time in the pharma space, in the diagnostic space with forces like Roche, Novartis, and some of the other leaders. Good guy, hangs out in Chennai sometimes, but I heard ran away to Bangalore. So I think with that, Shravan, we'd love to hear your perspective really on where you see the future on frugal innovation and technology in India. On how do we serve 1.3 billion people? No playbook.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, at my heart, I'm always a Chennai boy. As long as I'm within walking distance from a masala dosa, I'm good. But having said that, the problem that we're trying to solve today is healthcare for 1.3, 1.4 billion people. And I wanted to address a couple of points, set this up, and then I have a few slides also, but can mostly talk through it. And, feel free to jump in with any question or comment, or take me to a different track, off syllabus, also fine. But a couple of points that have been mentioned in, and I hear this a lot in the context of GE also, we talk about frugal innovation, and then we ask ourselves the question, what are we trying to address here, and how do we want to address it here? And at the core of this issue is access, right? How do we establish and deliver access for as many people in as equitable a manner as possible for the best likely clinical outcomes? Okay. And now, what do we mean by best clinical outcomes? Are we talking longevity? Are we talking quality of care? Since independence, our population has aged considerably. Life expectancy has doubled, from the mid to late 30s a child born today could expect to live to 70 and beyond. So what has happened over the years? So many influences to longevity. In the 40s and 50s, we were seeing a lot of action with antibiotics and just surgical practices, sterilization, hygiene. All of these things had a significant impact, and eventually came technology. But what had the most profound impact was vaccination and public health and cleanliness and hygiene. That had the most significant impact back then. And as technology, as we grew more and more adept with technology, we started adding a couple of years to the life of an individual, not least a patient. In the 40s, diabetes used to, diabetes strikes people typically in the 40s. We've gone past that for the most part. Cardiac care, that still remains, of course, a major problem in India. But now the diseases of the 70s, age 70s is what we're mostly trying to tackle, like oncology. And eventually there'll be more, mental health, neurological health, and all of these will also be something that we need to deal with. So now that we've established that perhaps longevity is something that is worth going for, what about quality of life? That's also something that we need to consider. So let's keep those in the back of our mind as we are framing what we are trying to solve for in a population of 1.3 billion. We want to extend life. We want to improve the quality of life. And then as a community, be healthy, be happy, prevent disease and whatnot. Now let's move to the next part of the problem statement, which is access. Since we want maximum healthcare for maximum people, how do we deliver access? And quite often, access is equated with cost. And I would make the argument that, yes, of course, while cost is an important factor, it's by no means the only factor. It's sometimes even a very small factor, because if you are able to deliver a very sophisticated technology, which can be used across hundreds of thousands of people, but that technology costs a significant amount, then you're amortizing it across millions of people. So that is one thing. On the flip side, if I were to offer this technology and we didn't have the skills to utilize it, or the scale to apply it, or the logistics to deliver physical access to it, then having this technology is pointless. So when we speak about frugal innovation, we could, A, look at products and strip them down and make them affordable and low cost, or B, you could deliver a technology which might be physically located in one place but accessible to multitudes, or C, offer a technology that can be accessed remotely and exponentially across a large number of people. So that is sort of the journey that we have been taking over the years as an industry. And I can speak, of course, for Wipro GE and give some specific examples. About 20 years ago, there was a desire for ECGs to be more prolific and easily accessible. So we took a sophisticated ECG, stripped it down to the bare minimum, made it portable so you could put it in a bag and cycle to the nearest village and put it to use. But an ECG machine can only have so much impact. What do you do next? You develop a CT scan, which 10, 15 years ago might have cost 6 to 10 crores. But for the benefit of that, the clinical outcomes, the quality of life that is delivered from these kind of technologies is tremendous. And you can put several dozens of patients in a machine through each day and get some excellent outcomes. But you still need to be physically present, and a machine has to be within a bus ride or a train ride or a car ride or whatever, right? That physical access was important. Now, if you want to go beyond it and make it truly accessible, this is where the digital story comes in. Now, moving a little bit to what the next 10 years will hold, we talk about precision medicine, right? Personalized healthcare as where the future is going. 2-3 years ago, we were saying that is our destination 2030. But what COVID has taught us is that it is possible to scale healthcare very quickly and get some of the best technology out there to the most remote villages and utilize various digital tools to make this equitable, make this accessible everywhere. So we are accelerating that as a company and as an industry. I believe that this can be accelerated. What is personalized healthcare? That is getting the most precise therapy and diagnostics. So if you consider a patient journey from from screening to diagnostics to therapeutics to monitoring, ensuring that the right patient gets the right treatment at the right time for a specific person. So Sam Mehta, age X, might have a very different prognosis or requirement for a particular drug or therapy than Shravan Subramanyam, age Y. So how do you make those decisions? It's well nigh impossible for one clinician or one hospital to make that decision. This is where data comes into the picture. We have now so many sources of data that are coming our way, right? From our wearables, everybody has a wearable, to the ECG machine, ultrasound, X-ray, your blood work, your clinical history, family history, all of this. How do you make sense of this and give precise information for therapy or monitoring for an individual? A human being cannot do it. I'm not saying you direct your patients to Dr. Google either, but now we're talking about clinical decision support tools and predictive modeling that we've already deployed for COVID. For say lung, looking at to what extent the lung is damaged or likely to be damaged due to COVID. We've already deployed AI tools. Now, what is AI? AI has been the most bandied about term, most abused term, I feel, in healthcare in the last few years. It's not as easy as one thinks, right? We take for granted that Alexa will play Suprabhatam when you say, play music at 6 a.m. and it'll play something, Bollywood mood music if you ask in the evening. But the range of parameters that you're asking Alexa is actually quite simple. The algorithm at the back end is not that complicated. If you want to do this for lung cancer, the number of parameters that you are trying to measure are at least a dozen, if not more. And with each new parameter that you're introducing, it's exponential. The degree of data that you need to collect and manipulate and provide predictive modeling for. I was just trying to understand how autonomous cars work. It has taken Google more than 20 million kilometers over a decade of driving to have an autonomous car that can more or less fly on a normal street. Not yet in Bangalore or Chennai, but in most streets. And yet we are comfortable giving the wheels of a car to an 18-year-old after maybe 3 months of training. Okay, so just to give you the scale, the magnitude that we're talking about when we want to introduce AI and decision support tools. Sam, I'll pause here, but I just wanted to frame the context on access, on frugal innovation, and how digital technology can eventually have an impact on patient outcomes.
Thanks, Shravan. So, Shravan, some of the things that you covered, the age of precision medicine has been on us for a long time. Today, a customer comes in with an expectation that the doctor gives them full attention, and they're obviously getting upset that a clinician now has to spend some attention on a machine, right? And those type of challenges are coming in OP, in inpatient care. They're also coming, and we're seeing the disruption that are happening in outpatient services and ambulatory services where concierge medicine is increasing in nature. So is that something you're going to expect, these digital assistants, multiple digital assistants for every human being? Because that's an opportunity that's out there, but it's also a challenge because that adds to the complexity of a consumer's life.
Exactly, Sam. It's and the consumer is already dealing with an onslaught of so much information. These days, you see people walking with that patch on their arm, which is gathering information about their blood glucose in real time. And aside from all the other information that your smartwatch is giving you, that your laptop is giving you, that your refrigerator is giving you, I've even come across a smart toilet which which can tell you what what basically you're urinating and what the sugar concentration of that might be. We have an overload of information, and I was again reading one of these statistics. I don't know what byte we are into now, well beyond petabytes, but the amount of medical data that we have, the amount of clinical data, health data that we have. It's roughly 1/3 of all human data that's available. But what we are actually meaningfully using is just a thin sliver of that, just barely a percentage of the information that's out there is what we are using meaningfully. Now, imagine if we found a way to collate all of that. Let's, even before we get into clinical practice, let me talk a little bit about preclinical salmon, because this is what informs the medicines and treatments that come about. There are now companies. I came across a very smart one in the Boston area, which trolls medical data to provide information for a clinical trial without a patient enrolling for a clinical trial. Meaning to say, if you are enrolling a patient for, let's say, primary hepatocellular carcinoma, and you want patients of this age group to that age group with the following symptoms, the following history, the following treatment, you don't necessarily need to enroll them for a clinical trial and say, okay, you come physically to this location and spend so many days and have this treatment. Just by trolling data from an EMR, from sequencing, from PCR results, and all of the tons of information, CT, MR, etc. You can pull out information that could say, okay, here are 1,000 patients that fit the criteria that you need for a clinical trial, retrospectively look at them, and then, and here's where it gets really fun. You can simulate what the outcome of the targeted therapy might be based on the genetic sequence material. Okay, and as recently as 15 years ago, this was unfathomable because it cost $1 billion and 10 years to sequence the human genome. Today, it costs a couple of $100 and a few days, and you have your entire human genome sequence. Your sequence will be available in under a week for a few $100s. So if we were able to bank your genetic data and get all this other medical information that is already available, you don't have to go anywhere, it's already available, and then you pull it together, you can run an entire clinical trial without even touching a patient. Okay, so now you try to extrapolate that to clinical practice. It's just going to boom open the kind of information that you have. But yes, to answer your question, we have too much noise, right? The signal to noise ratio really needs to improve a lot, because how do you narrow the focus and go for a specific clinical outcome? And what is a good clinical outcome these days, right? From a conventional clinical trial where you're looking at progression-free survival. Tomorrow, the expected outcome might be different. PFS might be taken for granted, but you overlay quality of life and other things also. And then obviously cost, the health economic aspect of it is also a very big part of the question, especially when you come to low resource countries like ours.
So let me take a leap. So one of the things I had read about and clearly I'm experiencing is the amount of data we produce every year is greater than the net data for all life before that year, right? And it's going to keep increasing. So that means it's not geometric scaling anymore. It is almost exponential scaling. Not quite, but close. One of the things that you mentioned, simulated outcomes for clinical trials. A good thing that they're not doing simulated outcomes for marriage success. Otherwise, my wife might kick me out of the house and my kids will definitely not want me as a parent at times. So sometimes on a
it's too late. It's too late for you and me. I think we got away lucky, Sam. But the next generation is in trouble.
Perhaps. So let's talk a little bit about this expectation that's been growing in our part of the world specifically, and now other parts of the world where people clearly have an expectation of gold standard first world clinical outcomes. But really, they aren't willing to pay, or the governments that they spend time with do not have the capacity, the capital, or the reserves to pay for that healthcare expectation or the facilities. And we're seeing that in India, where when 70% of the inpatient is taken care by the private, it means that the government, when it spends less than 2%, 1.3% last year of the GDP, will never be able to match in North America 16% plus, right? Or a United Kingdom 15% plus. We just do not have the scale. We do not have the taxpayer capacity to fulfill that. But the expectation of the people is give us those first world outcomes at almost frugal third world prices. And that's unfair because we're no longer third world. What's your sense on that? And how do you think we'll crack that? Because it's not that the last G state-of-the-art machine has gotten that much cheaper.
It has, but that's not the point. Look, people keep having expectations, right? I mean, we are humans, we are consumers, we see what's happening in the world around us. A generation ago, not many people had the opportunity to observe what's happening in, say, North America or Europe. Today, everybody has access to data and information. A couple of points before I get to it. There is a tendency to equate hospitality with clinical outcomes. Okay, and in a country like India, there are some hospitals which offer fancy service, some which don't. But you really have to get down to it. I'm a bit of a purist in the sense that leaving those frills aside, what are the specific clinical outcomes that we want to go for? And that is not a fair ask. I think it's a maybe not necessarily a constitutional right, but it's as a human being, we have a right to demand that and seek that. But we have to be rational about the pricing. It costs money, right? Yeah, the GEs of the world are constantly innovating and spending a lot of money on R&D. And if you want that next slice, moving from a 64 slice to a 128 slice to a 256 and beyond, one could argue that there's diminishing return on any slice beyond a certain number. But you want that, right? There's cool value in having the 256 slice CT. But let's come back now to the reality of what is clinical outcome and how do you allocate resources. If you were to go to your average, district health officer or even at a state government level and talk to them about this, and I have done this, right? I've asked these questions saying, would you be willing to invest X crores for cancer program, cervical cancer, breast cancer, what have you, or STEMI, NSTEMI, and whatnot? And quite often I get a jaded response saying, look, this is post-monsoon and my priority is diarrhea, okay? We are still in a world where we are dealing with infectious diseases, communicable diseases still remains a problem. And if a government can save 100 lives with, say, I'm just throwing out here, a couple of crores, what incentive is there for them to spend 10 crores to maybe extend the life of an elderly person by 4 or 5 years? So there is inherent lack of balance when we are measuring health outcomes by economics. Okay, so we need to get past that and say that yes, I want to allocate resources towards cholera and typhoid and whatnot. We have a responsibility to eradicate malaria and tuberculosis, but that doesn't mean we should not invest in the 65-year-old who needs a cardiac procedure or a 75-year-old who needs an oncology outcome, which might extend their life by another 4 years, 5 years. And also there again, we talk about the quality of care. So I think what we need to look for is a solution at scale, not compromise on technology, not compromise on quality, but deliver solutions at scale. Easier said than done, but we need to think a little bit like a factory mindset in terms of volume, getting people, ensuring that there is physical access to technology and also, as we learned during COVID, there was a significant shortage of trained talent, Sam. I could put the best PET MRI in my arsenal in any village in India, but nobody for 100 kilometers around will know how to use it. So what is the point? And it takes years, right? Because you need very well-trained people who have a college degree, who have specific scientific diplomas that are necessary to operate this. So we have to work on multiple scales, the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, the training, the specific skills that are required for once you have this result, what's the outcome? And here it's not any one company or one hospital's solution, right? When you're talking across the patient's spectrum, they might go to one hospital for screening, another hospital for therapeutics, and at home for monitoring with multiple different companies. So I think a digitally scalable solution is necessary. The government is making the right noises in trying to unify and make portable healthcare data. Again, easier said than done. You've got a lot of exposure to what's happening in the US. It's still, 20 years from Clinton's time. They've been trying to make healthcare data portable, to make it suitably private, and make it interoperable. It's not easy, but if we are able to do that and unify healthcare records to a certain extent, it will address a part of your problem, Sam.
No, thanks a lot, Shravan. And I think that's fantastic. I think in the, I am going to take away clearly the precision, personalized time, and still the tough expectation. How do you do something at scale, at cost? Quite a challenge, I think. And so, Shravan, let me jump to you and kind of like push this a little bit further. So clearly, we've got some outstanding systems from GE. We've got many other multinationals, and we have now many institutions across India. And you see some of them at the Edison project of yours, companies like Health Sensei with the remote ICU, companies like iBar, which does the quality triage and data things. We've got medical publications like Healthcare Dialogue. Are you seeing an opportunity to kind of like integrate the workings of some of these startups, major players with each other? Because historically, the majors never worked together that well. And we'd love to hear your view, Shravan, in terms of how do we get these different participants in the ecosystem at the supply side to start working a lot more together? Or is that just happening and we're just not noticing it?
I think that's a great question. And if COVID taught us anything, it is that, when you play nice in the sandbox and you collaborate and you share, the outcomes can just be terrific, right? So we know that it works. But how do you get an entity that has obviously its own biases and requirements to collaborate and get outside? Couple of possible solutions there, which I see working, have historically worked and that we need to try and amplify a bit. Number one is to get less biased institutions involved, right? It could be the government, it could be academia. Now, if you look at some of the product development and trial activities that we do, the ones that are, investigator initiated by an academic body, which is not funded by a drug company or a medtech company, tends to have fairly robust data, which you can share across platforms, and you see how multiple platforms can come together for better, clinical pathways, workflows, and eventually health outcomes. Here this since we just saw that there's a new head of the ICMR after Professor Balram Bhargava had done a tremendous job. Today we saw that there's a new head. I think it's an opportunity to continue that work and utilize organizations such as ICMR, the IITs, IISCs of the world to come together and hold industry accountable and bring about collaborative solutions. The second is actually what you pointed out, Sam, and I can speak to the example of GE. We realized that a large company like GE can, just almost by definition, it's difficult to be agile, right? Because you go down a particular product pathway and then suddenly it's like turning a ship. You can't just suddenly turn it around. But how do you then respond to the external environment and see how you can be more relatable to our consumers and our patients? And that is through startups. Within the India Edison Accelerator, we have onboarded 17 startups over the last few years in various aspects that touch our patient journey, the care pathways that we are addressing. So we are partnering with some entities that are doing work for predictive modeling of cancer outcomes, and some of them are doing visualization software. Some of them are able to better detect or better score cancer. And just as I also pointed out earlier for COVID. So it's taken us some years to realize that some of this is best done by other entities. I mean, historically, companies like us have always licensed in technology, but that usually happens once it's quite mature or once there is a clear runway. Now we're onboarding them at a much earlier stage. Not all of them are going to mature into clinical or commercial products, but at least we know what doesn't work, right? Keeping with the spirit of Edison himself, he knew 10,000 ways how not to make a light bulb. And so that spirit of experimentation and working with creative minds still lives on.
Thanks, Shravan. I think with that, let me sum up. Thank the wonderful panelists on a digital weekend. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to have your wisdom and thoughts shared on our panel.